What's up, you guys, and welcome to this video on storytelling for nonprofit leaders. I'm going to jump right in here, okay? Story sells in the nonprofit world. Those who tell clear, concise, and compelling stories consistently take home the money, right? It's that simple. And I'll say this in a different way to ensure that you hear me loudly and clearly. If you want to raise more money for your nonprofit, become great at telling stories. And to me, the power of story is magical, right? Nothing connects human beings more deeply than story. Through story, the full human being is engaged, right? As opposed to solely the rational faculties of the human being. And this full engagement allows for incredible movement in the life of a human being, right? Far beyond the movement or lack thereof that occurs when we engage humans rationally or logically, right? Let's talk about the story I used to raise over $1.1 million in 15 months for my nonprofit endeavors, and that others used to raise millions more for the large nonprofit that I worked for at the time. On March 8th, 2018, I locked eyes for the first time with one of the most beautiful beings I've ever encountered. She had just been born, right? And she started screaming and I started crying. And in that moment, an unbreakable, incredibly deep bond formed, right? That being was my oldest daughter, Scout Eleanor Griffin. And that encounter inspired me so much that within the next 24 hours, I wrote my first and only children's book. She was my firstborn, and as such, she was the apple of my eye, right? And my wife, Melanie, and I absolutely adored this baby. And within her first 9 months, we began to see a difference between her and others her age, right? The doctors let us know that Scout was behind developmentally and that they wanted to keep an eye on her development. And as her parents, we experienced a unique combination of concern and a lack of care, right? On the one hand, we knew that life could be more challenging for those who weren't typically abled. But on the other hand, this baby was awesome, right? And we knew she was going to be a world changer no matter what. And at her 18-month doctor's appointment, the doctor noticed a heart murmur when listening to Scout's heart. And by that time, he was convinced that we needed to dig deeper into her developmental delays, right? So we began testing in two areas. Number one, we tested Scout's heart. And number two, we tested Scout's genetic makeup. And in a few short months, we found out that Scout needed heart surgery to correct something called a double aortic arch. And at the same time, we were in and out of the hospital for genetic testing. And on December 19th, 2019, we received a double whammy, right? On that day, Scout had heart surgery. And while she was under the knife, Melanie received a call from her geneticist with Scout's diagnosis. Scout was diagnosed with something called Smith-Magenis syndrome. And neither Melanie nor I had ever heard of SMS at that point. So we started to do some research. And of course, if you've ever done any sort of medical research on the internet, you know that very little good can come from that, right? If you tell WebMD you have a cough, next thing you know, you're convinced you're dying of cancer, right? So anyway, it was a lot for us to digest. And I recall entering Scout's recovery room after her surgery and seeing her for the first time since her surgery. She was attached to all sorts of wires and monitors, and that was the moment when the emotion really set in for me. And I stayed in the room for a while, but after a bit, I took a walk, and I walked to the gift shop in the hospital and bought a book for Scout. It was Let's Make the Most of This Beautiful Day, Words to Live By from Mr. Rogers, right? And I took the book to the register, paid the cashier, and then I walked into the lobby, and I cried my eyes out. Right? Many questions pop into the mind of a parent of a child with a disability, and perhaps the two most dominant are, number one, how will the world treat my daughter? And number two, how will my daughter's future, or what will my daughter's future opportunities look like, right? And how will that make her feel? And Melanie did our best to digest this information, to see our daughter not as a diagnosis, but as the beautiful baby that we so deeply adored. Additionally, after being thrust into the world of disability and learning more about the challenges that people with disabilities face, we decided that we wanted to spend a significant amount of our professional time and resources serving Scout and people like Scout, right? And we didn't have any specific service opportunities in mind at the time, but our hearts were open and searching for them. And of course, as often happens in our world, when a heart is truly open and searching for something, the world provides it. And within 6 months of Scout's diagnosis, the leaders of the large nonprofit for which I was working at the time, which employed over 2,500 staff in over 100 countries and had been around for over 65 years, decided that they wanted to begin, for the first time, the process of setting up programming that would specifically serve people with disabilities. And of course, I happened to be in the think tank meeting where this idea was being discussed. And as I heard the intentions of the organization I worked for, loved and respected, to serve people like my beautiful baby girl, I broke out in tears once more. They were happy tears, right? First, I was grateful that the leadership in this organization would be so kind and thoughtful as to think of serving people with disabilities. And second, I knew in that moment that I was going to be the person who pioneered this programming for my organization. So I left that meeting on a mission, right? A mission to launch Fellowship of Christian Athletes' first sports camp for people with disabilities. And when I got back to Akron, I got everyone involved, right? Within a few months, I'd built a planning committee of over 40 people. I had a venue. I had a rough outline of programming. I had some major donors in place. Everything was in place to make this a reality. And on March 8th, 2021, we opened registration, and Scout Eleanor Griffin, right on her third birthday, age 3 at the time, was FCA's first ever registered all abilities camper. And within 45 days of opening registration, we had over 100 campers registered, and we knew we were onto something big. We hosted camp in June of 2021 with 180 volunteers and over 400 total people in attendance. And this incredible display of demand and need for these types of activities for people with disabilities poured gasoline on FCA's Let's Serve People with Disabilities fire. And shortly after camp, FCA decided to launch FCA's All Abilities initiatives on a global scale. And now that's not the end of the story, but let's pause to talk about the financial impact of this story, not only for my local area within FCA, but other nonprofit efforts within FCA as a whole. And so much of what this story has provided is unquantifiable because it's difficult to track the paper trail of all that has manifested as a result of one story, right? However, in my local area of FCA through camp, we raised 3 times the amount of money we'd raised at our previous year's fundraising banquet. I'd gone from having a small number of volunteers who were deeply invested in our efforts to having over 180 and counting volunteers nearly overnight. I gained incredible amounts of confidence in my ability to make a mission explode in all the right ways. The community gained incredible amounts of confidence in my ability to make a mission explode in all the right ways, which impacted all aspects of our nonprofit development, from board development to donations to doors opening with people who wouldn't give us the time of day previously. Additionally, I received a $200,000 donation to help expand All Abilities camps across the country. And thereafter, I launched my own nonprofit called Farming with Friends, through which we raised over $900,000 and hosted over 500 people at our first ever event, all in year 1. Much of the initial success of Farming with Friends must be attributed to this story, right? And hundreds of other staff people within FCA launched their own equivalent of our All Abilities camp and reaped the benefits, financial and otherwise, of this powerful story. And of course, the main point is this: one story can radically transform your nonprofit endeavors. One story can not only solve your money problems, but it can solve many other problems for your nonprofit. And if you're not telling stories or improving your ability to tell clear, concise, and compelling stories for your nonprofit, you're missing out on the biggest opportunity to transform your nonprofit, plain and simple. So with that in mind, let's talk about how to tell stories that attract abundant people and resources to your nonprofit. First, it's important to understand the psychology of story, right? Story opens doors within a human that rote facts and information cannot, right? And thus it moves humans to action in a way that rote facts and information cannot. First, story puts skin on your mission, right? Great movement leaders know how to get what's in their head into the heads of other people. They're incredible communicators, and the most powerful communications tool at their disposal is story. While your mission is crystal clear, or maybe somewhat clear, in your head, right? It's not in the heads of everyone else who is involved or who might get involved with your organization. Story helps you take what's in your head and plant it in the heads of others. And if you envision your mission as a ghost, right? Story helps you put skin on your lofty, ethereal, hard to grasp mission. It helps people see it more clearly. And the more stories you tell, the more they understand what your organization does. And of course, the more they understand what your organization does, the more likely they are to get involved with your organization. Where there's a lack of clarity, there is a missed opportunity to bring someone deeper into your mission. Second, fundraising is all about trust and connection, right? Story allows the fundraiser to build trust and connection more deeply and much faster than alternative communication techniques. Through story, I can tell you what breaks my heart, what brings me great joy, and what I care about most deeply. And I can show you my character and values. I can give you insights into my deepest motivations, right? All in a fun, indirect, and non-threatening manner. Story pulls the walls of the listener down, right? For example, when I tell you the story of my daughter's birth and diagnosis, you begin to see me as a human who has experienced deep pain and challenges. And because of this, I'm less threatening in your mind, right? Because of this, your walls come down and you're more likely to get involved with whatever it is I want you to get involved with, right? In short, you see that I'm more than a slimy salesman trying to take money from you, right? Although money might be one of my motives, I'm more well-rounded than that. Story tells you so. Story allows you to see behind my curtains, so to speak, without me telling you directly what's behind my curtains. Does that make sense, right? And the reason that's important is that if I were to try to tell you directly, right, if I were to say to you, I'm a trustworthy person, you'd run the other way. But through story, I can tell you that in an indirect way to where you grasp it, right? Story also makes your mission specific and digestible. Number one, it's specific, right? It's one thing for me to tell you that we serve 2,000 people. That can absolutely capture your attention. But it's another thing for me to tell you the specific story of a person my organization has helped, right? For me to take you into their journey and let you feel it. To engage not only your mind, but also your emotions and sense of interconnectedness to humanity. Specific stories stick with people, right? They're sticky. And they're more easily digestible than mass amounts of information. When I tell you that we serve 2,000 people or do 200 yoga classes per year or serve 650 meals a day, right? And walk 345 old ladies across the street on a monthly basis, you might be impressed, but you won't remember any of that, right? But again, if I tell you the story of someone my organization has helped, you'll remember it. Additionally, facts, statistics, and information, right, disconnected from story, all of those things appeal to the rational, logical side of the brain. And because of this, they trigger the argumentative side of the brain, argumentative side of the human, right? In other words, as soon as I start trying to convince someone to give to my organization through facts and information, there's something within them that wants to pick it apart, right? But story sidesteps this protective attribute of the human being. It connects with the emotional center and goes straight to the heart, which is far more powerful space, right? Those are far more powerful motivators than the mind. And if you've ever observed an audience during a presentation, when the presenter is presenting facts and information disconnected from story, you've noticed what happens. The audience might start off engaged, but over time they lose interest, right? Eventually half the audience is sleeping, the other half scrolling through their phone, right? But as soon as the presenter breaks into a personal story, the audience perks up and tunes in, right? They sit on the edge of their seat, locked in on the speaker. That's the power of story. Lastly, when it comes to raising money, story is an easier tool for the fundraiser to use than facts and information, right? In my early fundraising days, I felt that I needed everything memorized and that I needed a perfect presentation. Otherwise, I wasn't going to land the donation, right? I put so much pressure on that. And sometimes it was difficult to keep everything straight in my own head, right? Beyond that, trying to keep everything straight in my head often took me out of the present moment and kept me from connecting deeply with the person in front of me. But when I shifted from facts and information to telling stories, I found that my job of connecting with other people became much easier. I no longer had to memorize a ton of information. I simply had to share stories from the heart, and that was a load off for me. Okay, now that we know some of the psychology behind how story works, let's turn the page to understanding how to be the type of leader or storyteller who attracts abundant people and resources, right? I call these people magnetic leaders. And first, you must understand that people give to you to carry out the mission, right? You've probably heard the old saying, people buy from people they know, like, and trust. The same goes for fundraising, right? People give to people they know, like, and trust. Much of a potential donor's willingness to give to an organization depends on their personal relationship with the person asking them to give, right? If they know you, like you, and trust you, they're far more likely to give than if they don't. So what does that mean for you as the fundraiser? You must become the type of person who potential donors can know, like, and trust on a deep level, right? And of course, storytelling helps with this a lot. Through story, we get to know the storyteller, and we also begin to decide whether we like and trust that storyteller. But beyond that, what does it look like to become a magnetic leader? Let's start with the how not to become a magnetic leader, right? Becoming a magnetic leader is not about adding to your personality. It's not about trying to be someone that you're not. It's not about trying to be like that latest sales guru you saw on YouTube or TikTok, right? In other words, it's not about putting up false fronts or a false image. It's about being and displaying more of your deepest, more authentic self. It's about being more fully you in the presence of potential donors, right? It's about giving more of yourself to them in your raw, transparent, and vulnerable state. This is what draws people in. This is what makes a person magnetic. Let's talk about this from a different angle, right? By asking this question. What do your potential donors need? Here's the deal. Your nonprofit is not a for-profit business. So you're not focused on selling your potential donors items that meet their tangible needs, right? So you can't meet their tangible needs. So what needs can you meet, right? You can meet their intangible needs. So let's ask this question. What are the intangible needs of your potential donor? And let's broaden the question a bit. What are the intangible needs of every human that ever existed? On an intangible level, humans need community and connection, right? In a busy world where deep, meaningful connection is a luxury and afterthought, and where the vast majority of people live behind false fronts, providing your potential donors with true, heart-to-heart, authentic, real, raw, transparent connection can be a game changer for you and your nonprofit. Number 2, people need to be seen, heard, and understood. In a world where everyone is flying from task to task and where everyone seems to have an agenda, to slow down and simply see, hear, and understand the human in front of you can radically improve your chances of getting them involved with your nonprofit. Number 3, people need to be around people with integrity, right? In a world where most people cut corners, being a person of high integrity is attractive. Number 4, people need to be around people who are passionate. In a world where more people turn into dead robots than passionate human beings, being a person who is on fire with passion is magnetic. Number 5, humor, right? Humor is the great de-icer or wall terror downer for human beings, right? Nothing takes a dry room and adds life to it like light-hearted humor. In a world where people are serious, stuffy, and professional, being a person who carries life lightly while also taking it seriously is a breath of fresh air. Number 6, people need to be around people who are courageous, faithful, and bold, right? In a world where many people have allowed fear to keep them from pursuing dreams and incredible achievements, being a person who boldly pushes toward unreasonable goals is inspiring. And number 7, in a world where people are afraid to share their full selves with others, right? Being a person who drops the curtain and allows people to see the good, bad, and ugly can provide for deep connection and in some cases healing. It can provide for healing for the listener, right? So being a person of depth, vulnerability, and transparency is something that other people need to be around as well. So do you see how these attributes are not about becoming something different, right? They're not about becoming something at all. They're all about just being more you. And in my early nonprofit days in Ohio, I was working with a fundraising consultant, and she said something to me that has stuck with me to this day. Through her comments, she was attempting to pull out the magnetic leader in me, but she said, "Tristan, we need to see more of your Texas swag," right? I'm from Texas originally. I told her I didn't know I had swag, but I appreciate it, right? But what she was doing, she was trying to encourage me to become more fully myself in the presence of others, right? She was telling me not to water myself down. In fact, she was telling me the opposite, right? She was telling me to concentrate myself more, to show the world my full personality. She was pointing toward a loose and confident version of me at my best, not worried about my image, right? Simply being me. And I didn't at the time grasp the impactfulness of her comment, right? But that one comment helped me step out of being the reluctant leader and into becoming the magnetic leader that I needed to be to take my nonprofit to the next level. And we all have different versions of ourselves that we display to the world, right? The more we can show our true selves, the relaxed, confident, fully us version of ourselves, the more success we will have in connecting with people and raising money. And here's a little side note with respect to becoming a magnetic leader. Through tapping into and displaying more of your true self, you will alienate some people, right? There will be some people with whom you've built shallow relationships based on false fronts that you and they use when you're around one another. And when you drop those false fronts, some of those people will walk away. And I want to tell you that this is not only okay, but it's an incredible benefit and opportunity for you, right? Here are 2 reasons why. Number 1, those who don't like you for who you are aren't the people you want to spend your time around anyways. To keep them happy, you have to be a false version of yourself, which will eventually exhaust you. And second, although some people will walk away when you share your deeper self with the world, some will draw nearer, right? Beyond that, you'll find others who are truly like you, who share some of your deeper interests, values, and beliefs. And the connection you find with those people will be far deeper, substantial, and enjoyable than the connection you found with the people who connected with your false fronts. Right? Winston Churchill once said, "You have enemies? Good. That means you've stood up for something sometime in your life." And he's right. If you're going to truly pursue this nonprofit dream, there will be people who don't agree with what you're doing. And you have to become comfortable with that and dig your heels in on doing what you believe is right. Okay, now that we've built our storytelling foundation on you, let's talk about the practical strategy related to identifying and crafting compelling stories for your nonprofit. I call this the $1 million storytelling framework, and I call it that because I use this framework to craft the story that I used to raise over $1.1 million in 15 months for my startup nonprofits. But before we dive into the framework, let's begin by understanding some different types of stories. Number 1, the origin story, right? An origin story is what drives a person's connection to the organization. And in many cases, this might be the founder's story, right? But it doesn't only apply to the founder. It could be the story of how a board member, volunteer, service recipient, or anyone else became involved with the organization. And the origin story is often a powerful story touching on universal human issues with great pain and great resolve, right? It's often a story that displays the beauty of a human being determined to help the world. Number 2 is the transformation story. A transformation story, or even a testimonial, right, is a story of transformation that has taken place as a result of your organization's activities. This story could be the story of how a service recipient has This story could be the story of how a service recipient has been transformed by your organization's activities. But transformation stories can also apply to anyone else involved with your organization, right? Such as staff, board members, or other volunteers. Transformation stories provide great social proof. In other words, they show people who aren't currently involved with your organization the good that comes from being involved with your organization. They show them that other people are involved deeply with your organization. Number 3 is the hypothetical story, right? A hypothetical story is a fictitious story that can be used to show the transformation of which your organization is capable. The hypothetical is mostly used by startup nonprofits who don't have a lot of real-life transformation stories built up yet, or by organizations that are starting a new initiative through which they don't have a lot of transformation stories built up yet. And number 4 is a similar experience story. A similar experience story is a story that can be used to provide proof of concept when proof of concept hasn't arisen directly from your organization's activities yet, right? In other words, sometimes nonprofits use stories from other similar nonprofits to show that what they're trying to accomplish can be done or has been done, right? Often in another area, geographical area. For example, before I launched Farming with Friends, I visited other farms across the country that employed people with disabilities. And as a result, I was able to use their stories, right, to cast vision for the launch of Farming with Friends. Okay, now that we understand the types of stories, let's dive into the $1 million storytelling framework. Okay, so every story starts with a person and a problem. Of course, the person can be anyone and the problem can be anything. But here's an important thing to note about both the person and the problem. When it comes to connecting with the audience, you want the person to be relatable and you want the problem to be both specific and universal. For example, if the specific problem is that a person with a disability cannot find a meaningful way to fit into and contribute meaningfully to society, then the universal problem could be loneliness and a lack of fulfillment. Additionally, you must understand that the problem creates the tension within your story, right? And without tension, you will not garner attention. So to help the audience feel the problem, right? Help them see it and experience it, make it real to them. Again, a good way to do this is to appeal to the universal problems felt by all of humanity, right? Loneliness, frustration with difficult circumstances holding you back, being hurt by others, right? Those are all universal problems that every human experiences. Okay, and so once our story has a person and a problem, it needs a solution. And the solution is the framework, strategies, and tactics used to solve the problem, right? And next comes the new results. So we got a person, we got a problem, we got a solution, and with that solution comes new results. These are outcomes produced as a result of applying the solution to the problem. These results will be both internal and external, right? For example, if I help someone overcome homelessness through my solution, their external results might be a new home and a new job, while their internal results might be more confidence, peace, and joy. And of course, the fact that we have a solution, right, or a new way and new results indicates that we had an old way and old results, right? Those are also elements of story. Old way, old results. And the old way is simply the old and likely ineffective or less effective framework, strategies, and tactics that were used in an attempt to solve the problem. Right? And the old results are the outcomes produced as a result of applying the old way to the problem. For example, if the problem is homelessness, maybe the old way of solving the problem was to yell at homeless people, telling them to get a job and get off the street, right? And the old results were that people remained homeless and their self-esteem dropped, right? And so on top of all of that, with every story comes a backstory, right? And the backstory is how the person came to the place where they had the problem and desired the solution, right? In other words, it's the external circumstances or situation that gave rise to the internal call for change. And the backstory is often a powerful tool for connection, displaying frustration with the problem and a determination to play a role in the solution. Now, there are 4 more aspects of story that apply to most stories, right? Number 1 is what you might call the vision of failure, right? The vision of failure is similar to a rock bottom moment or a crisis moment. In this moment, the person usually comes face to face with his or her misery and might even play out the possible negative outcomes of his or her situation, right? If it remains the same. Number 2 would be a strong decision, right? The strong decision usually comes in the midst of the vision of failure or shortly thereafter. And the strong decision is the line in the sand, heels in the ground moment in which the person says, I will no longer allow it to be this way. Number 3 is a guide, right? The guide can be any number of things. It can be a person, a book, or an internal guidance system, right? You might call it God or intuition. There can also be multiple guides. But the guide serves the simple purpose of providing wisdom to the person as he or she navigates the path from problem to solution and new results. And lastly, what we have is obstacles, right? Obstacles are additional problems that arise throughout the journey. And like the problem, they add tension and drama to the story as the audience wonders if the person will be able to overcome the obstacles, right? And so the $1 Million Storytelling Framework is fairly simple to grasp. And once you understand it, you can use it to craft an endless amount of stories for your nonprofit, which brings us to the idea of creating a story bank, right? The story bank is simply a stockpile of stories related to your nonprofit. And this stockpile is created so you have a fresh and relatable story for every situation. And the story bank is created by diving more deeply into each of the elements of the $1 Million Storytelling Framework, right? For example, if I wanted to start creating a story bank for my nonprofit, I could ask myself the following questions. Who are the people, right? Or who are the person involved in my nonprofit? And as I identified each person, I would then start to craft their story within the context of my nonprofit. And once I did that, I could then ask the question, what are the problems my nonprofit serves, right? And as I identified each problem, I could start to build out the stories around those problems. And to continue building my story bank, I'd simply continue this process for each element of the $1 Million Storytelling Framework, right? So I'd go from person to problem to solution to new results, old way, old results, so on and so forth, all the way through it, right? And once you have your stories, it's important to know how to package your stories in a clear, concise, and compelling manner. And the Elephant Framework is something that I use to package my stories for audience consumption in a one-on-one or group setting, or even in a written fundraising solicitation letter, right? The Elephant Framework starts with this assumption. Every potential donor brings with him or her objections or mental roadblocks to getting involved with your organization. And I call those roadblocks elephants. We use the Elephant Framework to remove the elephants from the room, right? So we can progress your potential donor from an unwillingness to get involved to I can't wait to get involved. And some common elephants include, 1, is this a trustworthy organization? 2, are they making a quality impact? 3, is the problem they're solving important? 4, do I like the people within the organization? 5, I don't know if I had the money to donate. 6, would my money really make a difference? 7, the process of donating is too confusing, right? So those are just examples of elephants. There are other elephants. That's certainly not an exhaustive list. But through the elephant framework, we use stories to remove these elephants from the room, right? So let's talk about the structure of the elephant framework first. As we talk, and as we talk about each element, I'll provide an example of the framework in action, right? So here's the elephant framework. It starts with the mama elephant, right? And when this elephant leaves the room, others often follow, right? The baby elephants often follow. And if you don't remove this elephant, it will not matter if you remove all the other elephants, right? It's that important. And here's an example of a mama elephant. Is this organization making a quality impact, right? That might be a question, an elephant that a potential donor brings into the room. And so we would remove this elephant by telling a story or stories, right? And to remove this elephant, we could tell our best transformational story, right? Or maybe multiple transformation stories, depending on time and context. And we tell this story to show that we are, in fact, an organization making a quality impact. And so after the mama elephant comes the solution. And this is where we can get a bit technical by answering the questions, what's the problem our organization solves, and how do we solve it, right? And at this point, we can break into a more informational, non-storytelling bit about the mechanics of our organization, right? For example, we might say that our mission is to restore mind, body, and soul, and we accomplish this through yoga classes, group therapy sessions, and nutrition classes, right? But once we've explained our organizational mechanics, it's important to return to story. For example, we can provide more transformational stories of how our particular solutions have solved people's specific problems, right? And side note, it's even better from a social proof standpoint if the person who has been transformed can tell the transformation story. Okay, so we have the mama elephant, we have the solution. Now we have what I call the baby elephants, right? The baby elephants are the smaller elephants that also need to be removed to give us the best opportunity at a successful ask, right? And an example baby elephant might be, do I like the people within the organization? And a story that can be told to remove this elephant is the origin story of the founder or of a board member or of staff members, right? The origin story generally allows us to see into the deeper motives of the person whom it's about, right? And this helps us know and trust them, assuming the details of the story are good, right? And another example of a baby elephant might be, will my money actually make an impact? And the story that can be told to remove this elephant is the story of a donor who feels that her money has made an impact, right? Again, it's even better from a social proof standpoint if the donor can tell this story. Okay, and so once we've gone to from mama elephant to the solution to baby elephants, now I usually put my first ask in here. I'm going to do 2 asks, but I'm going to do one right after the baby elephant, right? So after we've removed the elephants from the room, it's time to make our first ask. And this ask is going to give people, the people who are already convinced, right, through this whole removing of elephants, it's going to give those people an opportunity to make their commitment while their passions are high, right? With that said, there will still be some folks in the audience that need their brain to fall in line with their heart, right? And that's when we transition to what I call brain time. So we've got mama elephant, solution, baby elephants, first ask, brain time. Okay, so brain time is for all in the audience who still aren't convinced, right? Now we appeal to logic. Now's the time to throw out your statistics. For example, right? How many people are you helping? How many meals did you serve? How many volunteers? And so on and so forth, right? And then after brain time is whenever we throw in ask number 2. Right, we wrap up at this point with another ask to give the people who were convinced by our appeal to logic an opportunity to make their commitment while they're still convinced it's a good idea, right? Okay, and so lastly, let me give you another element that I use with a lot of my storytelling. It's not directly related to storytelling, but I like to combine this with the elephant framework. It's generally my favorite type of ask, right? So we talked about ask number 1 and ask number 2. I'm going to tell you the type of ask that I often use in that scenario, and I call it the tiered bricks and sticks ask, okay? The ask is tiered or multi-level, right? And I say tiered because that refers to an ask with multiple giving levels, right? For example, a tiered ask might have giving levels at 500, 1,000, 2,500, 5,000, 10,000, and 20,000, right? And here are 2 suggestions to keep in mind while you decide what levels to make your ask, right? First, set your lowest level above the typical, let's just toss them some money amount, right? And here's what I mean by that. If the typical random person you ask tends to donate $100, then set your lowest amount above that, right? You want them to think, I was going to donate 100, but I can probably do 250 to reach the lowest level, right? This happened to me recently. Usually, when a person asks me to donate to an organization with which I'm not very familiar, right, I will donate $100 just to get started with the organization, and then I'll evaluate how things go from there. Well, an organization to which I was recently introduced sent me a solicitation letter in the mail shortly after the introduction, and the lowest level on their letter was $240. Of course, I was already in for 100, right? And when I saw this 240 mark, I said, why not, right? I can make 240 happen. And that organization received an extra $240 just by stretching me a bit with their lowest level. So consider that with your lowest level. And the second thing to know about these levels is set your highest level at twice the amount you'd like for your largest donors to reach, right? For example, if your typical large donation is $10,000, then set your highest level at $20,000. This is a simple psychological tactic, right, that helps your chances of receiving the $10,000 donations you're hoping for. Most people will not donate at the highest amount, even if they have the capacity to do so. What they generally do is they step it down one level, right? Which means that you need to make sure your step down level is still a big win for your organization. Additionally, on top of all of that, simply having larger numbers in your ask will make people think bigger about your organization and your organization's needs, and it will stretch them further, right? Okay, so that's the tiered portion of the ask. Now, why I call it a bricks and sticks ask is because we attach your ask to something tangible and compelling as much as we possibly can, right? So in my early days as a fundraiser, I had a friend tell me that people like to give financially to bricks and sticks. And he was talking literally about building projects, but there was a lot of truth in his statement, right? The more you can tie their donation to something tangible, the more likely they are to give. For example, when I launched Farming with Friends, we knew that the most compelling portion of our mission was our employment of people with disabilities. And we also knew that it cost us $5,000 a year to employ one person with a disability, right? So we tied our donation request to this initiative. On top of that, even if you're asking people for general operating expenses, let people know what those expenses are, right? An example, salaries, insurance, costs of infrastructure, all of that, right? This transparency and the donor's ability to feel as if they're contributing to something tangible goes a long way in helping your organization secure a donation. Okay, so let's wrap our discussion on storytelling with one challenge and one additional framework. Okay, number one, if you're a nonprofit leader listening to this, I want to challenge you to publish one piece of your nonprofit story every single day for 365 days. And I usually recommend a daily 1 to 3 minute video published on your favorite social media outlet. But you can execute on this challenge in whatever way fits you, right? You might be more of a writer, and that's totally cool. Write more, but do videos. Try a few different mediums, right? The benefits of completing this challenge are absolutely incredible. Number one, it will provide so much more clarity for you. When you set out to tell a piece of your story every single day, over time, you become very good at identifying the stories within your nonprofit and telling them in a clear, concise, and compelling manner. Number two, this provides incredible clarity for others, not only community members, but even board members and people close to your organization, right? Each story puts more skin on your mission. Therefore, if we do some simple math, we can see that more stories equals more skin on our mission, right? And the more skin we put on our mission, the more people in our community are likely to get involved with our mission. Where there's a lack of clarity, there will be a lack of conversion, right, of donors and volunteers and people getting involved with your organization. Tell many stories to provide clarity to your community regarding your mission. Next, it also provides deeper connection with you and your heart, right? People give, again, to people they know, like, and trust. And when community hears from you often, they get to know you faster, they like you, hopefully, faster, and they trust you, assuming you're acting in a trustworthy manner, faster, right? By telling a lot of stories, you accelerate the path of potential donors, taking them from non-involvement to involvement much faster than if you told one story once a month, right? This also provides more eyes on your organization. To build an audience of raving fans, you need time and consistency. And when you publish daily for 1 year, you give your audience plenty of content and plenty of time to find you, become familiar with you, and to get involved with you. And lastly, one of the great benefits here is just growth for you. Unless you're a big shot on social media, right, there's a good chance that this challenge will take you out of your comfort zone, which is great for you, right? It will force you to grow in your communication skills, but it will also help you care less about what others think, which will pay dividends for your nonprofit efforts. Additionally, as mentioned before, when you tell a piece of the story every day, you become very good at telling the story over time. And this proficiency pays dividends for your nonprofit efforts, right? With that said, there are many reasons you might not want to do this. I hope you will ignore them for the sake of yourself and the people your nonprofit serves. But here are a few of those, right? Number one, I hear it all the time, I'm not a great storyteller. You can't use that excuse anymore, right? I just gave you a framework that will help you become a great storyteller. Number two, people think it has to be polished. That's not true, right? Your published material does not have to be polished. In fact, unpolished materials often outperform polished materials on social media all day long, right? People like real, raw, and genuine more than they like clean and polished. I also hear I don't have time for that. If I told you that completing the challenge would produce a significant amount of financial and people support for your organization, would you then have time for it, right? We make time for that which we believe is important and valuable. And if you don't currently believe it's important, take from some of my belief, right? This will radically transform you and your nonprofit. There's another reason, right? This is a big one. What will people think of me, right? They'll think I'm annoying or silly or insert your undesirable label here, right? To accomplish your nonprofit dreams, you're going to have to give up your desire to please others. You might as well get to it now, right? Further, what will you think of you if you complete this challenge, right? What will you think of like, man, I can't believe I did that for 365 days for my mission? Beyond that, what would the people you serve think of you if you completed this challenge on their behalf, right? You're out there telling the story 365 days. It's incredible for them, incredible for you. At the end of the day, there are a million reasons you can come up with not to do this, right? Again, my hope is that you will ignore them and engage in this challenge for the benefit of yourself and your nonprofit. And lastly, here's a simple framework you can use to draw attention to your stories and move your audience to take action, right? It's just hook, story, call to action, right? 3 parts. Hook. This is simply a short statement, right? Generally a few sentences at most that captures your audience's attention and draws them further into your communications, right? It makes them think, I want to hear more. Here's an example, right? I used one story to raise $1.1 million for my startup nonprofit in 15 months, right? That makes you want to hear more. If you're a nonprofit leader, you're like, okay, how do I do that, right? Or how did he do that? Okay, beyond hook, the next step is story. And this is simply your story, right? Whatever story you're telling that day. And when I say story, it can just be bits and pieces, right? It can be even just a look at what you're doing that day, whatever it might be, right? There are many different ways to tell the story. Be creative when it comes to telling your story. And then lastly is call to action, right? It's hook, story, call to action. And this is the action you'd like your audience to take. And for the most part, it's important to have a call to action in every communication, right? However, there might be specific times when you want to leave one out, right? Perhaps when you feel like you've been asking a lot of your audience lately. But for social media posts, a good call to action might be follow our page on Facebook, right? With a link to the Facebook page embedded in your post. Of course, within your fundraising communications, the call to action is the financial ask, right? Okay, let's remember, story sells in the nonprofit world. Those who tell clear, concise, and compelling stories consistently take home the money, right? In short, if you want to raise a lot of money, become great at storytelling. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, share, follow, or subscribe. All of those actions help me reach more people with this message. And if you haven't already done so, join the Nonprofit Growth Mastery group that I run on Facebook. It contains other resources similar to this to help nonprofit leaders thrive and create thriving nonprofits. And lastly, if you're interested in diving deeper into the topic of storytelling and truly making genuine, lasting, substantial progress in this realm and many others that are absolutely necessary for your success in the nonprofit space, check out my online course. You can find more information about this on our website under the Our Products section. The product is entitled Boom Package, which includes the online course, coaching from me, and an online community of nonprofit leaders who are traveling the same path as you, understand you, and can provide you with wisdom and encouragement as you seek to make your nonprofit dreams a reality. Otherwise, don't hesitate to reach out if I can be of service. Take care, friend.